Welcome to the Sober Life Rocks podcast. I'm your host, Margie Schaller, and I want to welcome you today and let you know that you are not alone. You may have made the decision not to drink alcohol or, at the very least, not at work-related events. But whether you've never been a drinker, are in recovery, maybe made a health-related decision, we see you. In today's world, networking, socializing, celebrations, they all seem to happen over drinks, and the struggle can be real. But through this podcast, we're changing that narrative. We are here to create a community where individuals like you who choose not to drink or drink less can find camaraderie, support, and practical advice. So let's get the conversation. I'm just like bubbling over because I'm so excited to have our guest, Alysse Bryson. She is the founder and CEO of the Sober Curator, as well as VP of Community Development at Work P2P. Alysse is a strong woman in recovery, an innovative media maven, a content creator, a marketing guru, and a gal about town. With 18 years of consistent sobriety, this sober gal has a humorous outlook on life and a fierce determination to succeed. Now, she tells me that the back of her baseball card highlights 25 years of traditional media, with nearly a decade running the Seattle Met magazine and 6 years at King 5 NBC TV station. Alysse has thrown hundreds of parties in Seattle, rubbing elbows with local celebrities, raising awareness for countless nonprofits. She has a son, she has a Boston Terrier, which makes her dear to my heart. And despite all of life's curveballs, she's proud to recover out loud and show the world how much fun a sober lifestyle can be. Alysse, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thank you for having me. Such a
Absolutely.
treat to be here.
A fellow Seattleite, a fellow Boston Terrier.
I know you love Boston Terriers. You love the Pacific Northwest. I mean, let's get
Yeah,
matching tattoos. I'm ready.
absolutely. And I've got 19 years of sobriety and you've got 18. Like,
Yeah, basically we're in the same class. Yeah.
awesome. Love it. So one of the things that I just love to like kind of dig into and explore is your childhood and how what the role of alcohol was for you and sort of how that might have played into what you eventually grew into. So tell me
Sure.
a little bit about what it was like for you growing up.
Well, I grew up in the small town of Centralia, Washington, which, if you're looking at a map, is located halfway between Seattle and Portland, Oregon, on the I-5 corridor. My parents actually still live there today. They've been married for over 50 years. They're still in the same house. I was just down there. I go down, I try to go down monthly. And both of my parents met in Centralia. They were both teachers at the time. They met in choir both, and they connected over the fact that both of their fathers were pastors in the Nazarene church. And so I grew up in a Christian home. I went to a private Christian school where my mom was the teacher. There was never any alcohol in our house then. There's still never been any alcohol in our house now. There was really growing up, my family on both sides, my mom's side and my dad's side, there was never any alcohol. I don't even know that there were any divorces. Um, but I had heard over the years that there were like extended family members that might have, alcohol problems. And I didn't try alcohol until I was 16. And the first time I tried it, I didn't like the taste. I never really drank for the taste, to be clear. And it didn't have much of effect on me at all. Like I didn't get a buzz, nothing really happened, but all my friends thought it was cool. And then it was the second time I drank. I think it was Boone's Farm. Ugh. Um, and that's where, it made me feel special, different, alive, vibrant, funnier, and I hear a lot of people in the recovery community talk about the fact that they felt different or they didn't feel a part of. It's a really common feeling. I think it's a human condition thing, quite honestly. But that was me too. And so alcohol just made me funnier. It made me come alive. It made me do a lot of stupid things. Um,
But how did your upbringing of like no alcohol play in your head? Was there shame also around this, or was it
there
just
wasn't shame, but there was a lot of secrecy, right? And
makes
a
it even
lot of
more
lying.
dangerous and fun?
Mhm, mhm. A lot of lying, a lot of trying not to get caught. Um, but it escalated very quickly for me. I was definitely blacking out within the first 6 months of trying my first drink. And, the first time I blacked out, it was horrific. I was terrified. I was like, oh, I can never do that again. Like, I don't remember anything that happened. And from what I hear, I did a lot of things, and but then it became kind of common, and so I thought it was normal, and it became like a normal part of, oh, sometimes when I drink, I black out, and it just became normal. And even over the years, my last name being Bryson, I came up with an acronym, Bob, Blackout Bryson. And my friends even started calling me Bob. Like I was wearing it like a badge of honor, like it was cool. And it was not cool. And I can even remember being at parties and somebody saying, "Why do people call you Bob?" And I was like, "Oh, because I black out." And like some people would laugh, but a lot of people wouldn't. Like they didn't think it was funny. And so I definitely drank alcoholically from basically the beginning. um, and at 20 years old, I had gone to college up in Seattle. I had dropped out. I had gone to airline school, and I was back in Seattle working for United Airlines. And I had met a guy, and we were partying a lot together because I was working. This was before the internet, and so that's when people actually had to call people to make reservations on United Airlines or Alaska Airlines. So yes, you would call and you would get me, and I would make your reservations. And we were working. A friend of mine and I were working a night shift, so then we would come home, we would party, we would sleep in, and we were just Groundhog's Day. And I got pregnant, and I thought, oh, this pregnancy, this is really going to help straighten me out.
Mhm.
And we never got married. My son is now about to be 28, which is crazy. So I was a young mom. I was a young single mom within a couple of months after having him. I had left. I had separated from the dad. We never got married. And so I spent my 20s being a single mom. I had moved back to Centralia because that's where my parents were. I lived with them. I moved in and out of their house quite a few times in my 20s. I would get out on my own and we would have a little house or an apartment. But my drinking and my partying, I was just not able to do it all. And I was making more money, but I was spending more money, and it was just kind of just like one slow moving train wreck. And so at the age of 30, during my 20s, I had fallen into a career in advertising at the local newspaper in Centralia. And I was really good at it. I'm really good at talking people into things. I have the gift of gab. Um, and I remember when I interviewed for that job, they were like, "So why do you want to be in the newspaper business?" And I was like, I don't know. I just want to make money. I don't even read the newspaper, but I can talk people into things, and that's what the job is. So I feel like I'd be good at it. And I just took to it like a fish to water, kind of pun intended there. And the more that my career progressed, the more money I had, the more things we could do. But I was still just a drama queen and a party queen, and I was just trying to compartmentalize it. I was a PTA mom at the Christian school where my mom taught, and now my son was going, but I also was at the dive bar on the weekends. And so it
Oh
was
my gosh,
just
you and I
kind of
are
a
sisters.
juggling disaster, really.
Exactly what my life is like.
Yeah. And so I woke up one day and I was like, you know what? I had started to burn a lot of bridges in that town. And I was like, I'm gonna go to Seattle. That's where the father of my child lived, and he had gotten married, and they had had a child. And I was like, so I'll move close to them because my son's getting older. He needs to spend more time with his dad. And I was like, I'm gonna apply it to the Seattle Times, and I'm just gonna get out of here. And literally from the morning I woke up and had that thought, 30 days later, I was living in Seattle working at the Seattle Times. So I think that's a really great example of how even though we can be like in the grips of our addiction, we can still really thrive professionally, right?
Mhm.
The month that I checked into treatment, I was salesperson of the year at the Seattle Times. So like you can both things can coexist actually.
Yeah.
And that could be for me, I felt like, well, obviously I don't have a problem or I wouldn't be thriving professionally. So I was able to use it as my crutch of, oh, everything is fine. Everything is fine. And so I moved to Seattle. I got an apartment in Mill Creek. I was commuting. And my drinking, I had just turned 30. My drinking, it took a real noticeable change like in my body. I could tell it was different, and I really was at a point where I knew I couldn't control it. Once I started, I could not stop. I wasn't at the point that I was drinking all day every day, but like also like if I started drinking, I would definitely still be drinking at 10 o'clock the next morning, right? I had introduced a lot of drugs into my life because that would keep me from blacking out. And everything was just kind of falling apart, and I could see it. Like the writing was on the wall. And so serendipitously, there was a woman that I was carpooling with. We got free parking in downtown Seattle, which was expensive then, and it's expensive now. And if we found somebody that also worked at the Seattle Times and we could carpool together, we would get free parking. And I was like, more money to drink sounds like a great idea. And I ended up getting partnered with this woman. We were in the same department, and she also lived in North Seattle, and she was sober. And so, traffic in the Seattle area, like to get to downtown, some days a half an hour, other days an hour, you just never knew. So her and I started spending a lot of time together in the car, and obviously I can't stop talking. And so I was just kind of like word vomiting all over her in the car of everything that was going on in my life. And she was just super patient with me. She was like, "Yeah, I know what that's like. And if you want to do something different, I'm happy to tell you what I did." And that was it. She never said anything more. Like there was no hard sell, there was no hard push. It was like when you want to do something different, let me know. And so eventually that day came where I called her and I said, "Okay, like what do I do?" And so that kind of set me off on my journey. I ended up checking into an outpatient treatment program in Kirkland because I was also very much like, I'm a single mom. I can't take 28 days off. I'm not Sandra Bullock. I got to work. So I had figured out if I did outpatient, I could work and do outpatient at night. It was a summer break, so my son went to stay with my parents. I could go down and see him on the weekend. So I just immediately started managing my bottom, like project managing my bottom, right? And I surrounded myself with other like-minded young women in recovery, and we went to meetings and we went to different events and did different things. I went to Barnes and Noble. I bought every possible book that was in the book section. There were like five, to be clear. Like there was hardly anything back then.
Yeah.
Social media was just getting started. So I think I was on MySpace. So there was none of the recovery out loud or the sober or sober curious movement that we're seeing today. None of that existed in 2006. And I know you know that since we have comparable time.
Yep. Yep. Gosh, your story sounds so much like mine in so many ways. And, I remember I was working at a job. Two people who were above me had left. And so I was left doing all three of our jobs very successfully, single mom. And I was gifted by my parents with an intervention. And
Mm,
it was a
Merry
bit,
Christmas.
it was a kinder, softer, gentler intervention, but the end result was the same, which was an invitation to go to treatment. And I remember having all of those objections, like, what am I going to do? Like, who's going to take care of the kids? And my ex-husband might try to take the kids away, and I might lose my job, and all the things.
Yep.
And what ended up happening was that this interventionist smiled and said, "We can overcome all of those things." And
Uh-huh.
my parents flew out, and they spent the time with my kids, being me, and they taught me how to get a medical leave of absence without telling anybody why.
Hmm.
And again, back then things were very different. And so when I came back to work, I kept it all hidden. I
Oh,
was
sure.
I was secretly sober for 18 years
Hmm.
at work. So what was that like for you with the work piece of it? Like, people knew you as this drinker, and now all of a sudden
People knew me as a
sober.
drinker, and then all of a sudden I wasn't. But I was still new to Seattle. So I hadn't made a lot of friends. I was under a year in Seattle. And I had come under the idea that it would be a clean slate, and we know that the problem with that theory is wherever you go, there you are, right? And so I hadn't made that many friends yet, especially because my drinking at home and isolating had really taken off in those last months. And so I had already kind of like turned off all my party friends from Centralia. I wasn't really talking to them. Social media wasn't a thing. So I just kind of like launched on, lobbed on, or hung on to these, people in early recovery. And there were actually a handful of women at the newspaper that were also in recovery. And so there was two, three, four of us, and we would go to a noon meeting, that 12-step meeting in Ballard that we could get to on our lunch break. And I was an outside salesperson, so I had a lot of flexibility. So there was a few people that knew, but I was definitely not talking about it to anyone that didn't know. I was definitely not putting it on a t-shirt or on a hat, right? Like for the first several years, it was not something I wanted anyone to know about me unless it came up in a really natural and organic way, or a way that I could clearly be helpful. But other than that, I did not want anyone to know.
Yeah. Now, outside sales, does that mean that you were responsible for going out into the public and like taking people to lunches or dinners or things of that
Yes.
nature?
Yes, I
So what
was at my
type of
time at
business?
the newspaper, I was specializing in automotive. So I was dealing with all the luxury automotive car dealerships on the east side of Seattle. So think Bellevue, Redmond, Kirkland, a little bit of Renton. So yeah, a lot of schmoozing, whining and dining, and I had to learn how to disguise myself as still a drinker, because people will really take note. Drinkers will really take note if you're not drinking. And so I had to learn to go to the bartender and be like, can you make me a drink that looks like a drink but isn't a drink? And because they didn't have any of the alcohol free cocktails or mocktail menus that we're seeing, everywhere today. And I tried to do more lunches than dinners because I felt like I could get away with it a little easier. But yeah, it was definitely tricky. And before I hit 2 years sober, I left the newspaper and moved over into a lifestyle magazine. And this was like landing my dream job. Like, I grew up obsessed with magazines. My bedroom wallpapers were wallpapered in full page ads and editorial out of magazines. I was obsessed with magazines. And I moved up really quickly at that magazine. It was a newer magazine, and it was kind of a startup. And there were, I think at the time I started, maybe 30 people. And I went from being an account executive to becoming the advertising manager to director to associate publisher to publisher. I like that all happened like within a 5-year window of early recovery. And over time I did let people know, and we were throwing a lot of parties. So I also had to, it wasn't just lunches and dinners. Now it was like these events with top doctors and top lawyers and top dentists. And the dentists can really party. Let me tell you, the dentists know how to tie one on more so than the other categories in my experience. And
Mhm.
so I really had to kind of learn how to blend and not stand out, because I just didn't want it to be a topic, right? And if people had to know, I'd be like, yeah, I don't drink, you don't have enough. I'd make some funny joke, but I would try to change the subject as soon as I possibly could.
Yeah. And you and I got sober at a time when that was the norm, because the norm was not recovery or not sobriety. And today, while it definitely times are changing, I talk to a lot of people for whom that's still their decision, and that's okay.
Yes. Yes.
It's okay, but it is tough. And that's one of the reasons why I love what you're doing. It's so in alignment with what we're doing, which is like, how do you continue to live your full life, your best life, sober, in a world where the currency of connection is still alcohol?
Yes. You
So
know,
talk to me about that
it's
some.
I think recovering out loud or letting people know that you're sober, um, I think is a very personal choice. I
Mhm.
would never judge anyone for never talking about it for the rest of their life. Like, I don't care how much the world changes. Like, if you don't want to talk about it, you don't have to. I didn't want to talk about it for a really long time until I realized the connection of, oh, I can actually be really helpful. And being helpful, being of service has become a huge part of my life, a huge part of my recovery. Um, And but I also, probably around the 4 or 5 year mark in recovery, I hit an emotional bottom. I was finally recognizing that I actually, and I was diagnosed with depression and another mental health challenge. And so I hit a bottom in recovery that felt even worse than than when I got sober, because it wasn't about wanting to drink or to relapse or to go back out, whatever words. I didn't want to live. And that
Mm.
was really scary. That was really scary. And I had an incident. I was on a sales call. I had gone out to a casino in Bainbridge Island. So I had to take a ferry to get there. And for like days, I just couldn't stop crying. I was even crying in meetings, just like tears falling down my face. And people would be like, "Are you okay?" I'm like, "Oh, sorry. It's just allergies, or it's something with my eyes. Don't mind me." Like I was totally playing it off, but I was like very visibly broken. And I had just missed the ferry coming back over to the Seattle side. So I was the very first car in line for the next ferry. And I was just sitting there sobbing, sobbing, sobbing. And as the ferry docked and people were exiting and they were going to get ready to let, the line go, I had this thought that I could just drive on and drive off like Thelma and Louise. And what terrified me the most is I didn't think I was going to be able to stop myself. That's where I was like, oh, that I need help. And fortunately at this point in my recovery, I had a very strong community. I had someone to call. They stayed on the phone with me. As soon as I got to the Seattle side, they were still on the phone with me. I drove straight to an emergency room. Like I had all the insurance policies in place to deal with it.
Mhm.
And I'm really grateful that I did. But it took that kind of emotional, psychological bottom in sobriety to really get me to finally realize, oh, I actually do have to change everything. It's not just not drinking. It's not just not doing drugs. I have to actually change how I show up in the world. I have to actually change how I treat people and how I allow people to treat me. And so that was a really pivotal time. And from there, my career really took off and things got really great and big and fun and splashy. And I was going to fashion shows and elbowing with celebrities and traveling to all these beautiful resorts to sell advertising. I was going to Hawaii and Palm Springs multiple times a year on somebody else's dime. It was great. I was wearing, fancy business outfits and stilettos and going to all kinds of galas and just living the life. And everyone, if you looked at my Facebook feed, you thought I was having the best life ever. And while I was having a good time, I had shifted and become a full-blown workaholic. Like my job had become everything, my identity, my ego. I was compromising, and my son was now in high school, and I was working more than I was spending time with him. I was a single mom still. I was been a single mom the whole time. And I had a woman in my life saying, if you don't slow your roll, sister, if you don't figure out balance, you're going to end up having a heart attack. And I was like 39. I was like, stop. You don't know what you're talking about. I'm fine. I'm a go-getter. I can just do a lot really fast. I have superpowers that other people don't have. But sure enough, the day after I turned 40, I was in the ER, and within a month from then, I had emergency heart surgery.
Mm.
I had a blockage in my LAD, which is often called the widowmaker. And I went in for a stress test to figure out what was wrong with me, because I've been having these episodes that I later learned was anginas. Kind of an unfortunate word, if you ask my opinion. But what they explained to me is they're kind of like baby heart attacks, for lack of a medical description. And so that's when they discovered the blockage, and I was 95% blocked. They were actually like, if you had had a heart attack, you would have died on the spot.
Mm.
And yes, my drinking and drugging career definitely contributed to that, but my workaholism contributed to that, and of course my family history contributed to that. But that's a wake-up call at 40 to like be rolling into heart surgery and not knowing if you're coming out. Like that's a wake-up call. And the same week, my son had gotten very sick very quickly. And he was 18 at the time. He had lost a lot of weight, and he's about 6 foot, and he was down to 120 pounds. And we did not know why. And he had gone camping a weekend or two beforehand with a childhood friend, and that friend's father was a doctor, and he had called me and said, Alysse, I think you need to get Jacob in to see someone. Something's not right. And 2 days after my heart surgery, he was diagnosed with Crohn's disease. And
Mm.
so our house just got wrecked. We just both went from flying high. He had just graduated high school. He was going to be starting college. We had moved to Mercer Island. Like, I was like, I've arrived. And now we're both dealing with debilitating lifelong illnesses. And so the next 6 months after that were kind of like a really sad country song. I fell and I got a concussion, and I was not able to return to work and not be a workaholic. I was doing cardiac therapy at Swedish on Capitol Hill, and they were like, you cannot work more than 30 hours a week. And my first day back, I worked 15 hours. I couldn't stop myself. And so I was like, I was very quickly realizing I wasn't going to be able to stay in the job. And then my son had to have a major surgery, and I was relocating the office, and like everything was just kind of falling apart. And I worked the whole time he was in the hospital, and we came home, and within 24 hours of being home after that week-long stay in the hospital, our 4-year-old dog died. It was a freak accident. He'd eaten a squeaker out of a dog toy, and the dog dying was it. Like, I was like, I'm done. Like, I'm walking away from all of this. And so I had a lot of vacation time accrued. So I was like, I'm going to take like an 8-week sabbatical. I got to take a break, because something didn't, as terrifying as the heart surgery was, as terrifying as my son's surgery was, I was coping with those things. But the dog dying, that I was not able to, that was so final and such a shakeup for me, and finally just really got my attention. And so we took time off. Within 2 weeks, we got our first Boston Terrier, Roxy, because we couldn't handle how quiet the house was. And we had gone to the Oregon coast that winter, and I was walking down the beach with the puppy and realized, I heard this voice, the universe, God, whatever you want to call it. It was like, you can't go back to that job. It's going to kill you. Like, you have to walk away. And I was like, but it's who I am. It's my ego. It's my career. Like, this is my dream job. This is everything I ever wanted. What are you talking about? But I walked away from all of it, and just took a year off, to reset my household. And that was the scariest, most painful, and best thing that could have ever happened to me. Right. Um,
You know
yeah.
what I love about this story so much, and again, it parallels so much of my story as well, but there are people who don't drink for health reasons. There are
Yeah.
people who don't drink for
Tons.
religious reasons. There are people who
Tons.
it's not a thing. But there are those of us who drinking became the solution to something inside of us, to
Yeah.
some problem inside of us. And even when we stop drinking, that thing is still there.
Yep.
And we're looking to cover it up with something else, something else, something else. And some people it's eating, some people it's gambling, some people it's shopping. For me, for you, it was working. And we can take alcohol to our deaths. We can take working to our deaths. We can take gambling to our, absolute ruin. At the end of the day, if we don't address the thing inside,
Mm-hmm.
like, we're just doomed to continue to find another replacement.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I've had some moments, I've had some years where I've literally, like you, full stop,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
got to figure this out. Because even at 10 years, 15 years, now 19 years sober, like, that doesn't matter, because
No, people have this idea, I think, that, oh, the longer you do it, the easier it gets. No, no. Now, I don't say that to freak
it's
people out,
different.
because I'm a big advocate of long-term sobriety. It doesn't get easier. It does get less hard,
Yeah.
and you do get more tools, and you do build a good, solid community that can walk through it, but you still have to walk through it. You know, I told you before we started this recording, that Roxy, I had to put her down a month ago, and I've been walking through grief for the last month. I'm not doing anything to numb it. I'm not shopping. I'm not eating excessive amounts of sugar. Well, I did eat probably one too many popsicles yesterday, I'm not going to lie. But I'm just walking through the grief because the only way out is literally through. Nothing else, no band-aids will fix it. And so it's taken this long to be able to even try to practice those things. Like it just takes what it takes. And there's not some level we reach. I had a gal ask me once, at what point in sobriety do you stop becoming an asshole? I said, I don't know. I'll tell you when it happens. Like I have no idea.
Yeah.
Right? Like there's not, it's just, we just have to keep peeling layers back and digging deeper to get to the root of the causes.
Yeah. Now, that being said, I think that there are a lot of people who are able to work through those things, but still in the workplace, like we can feel very left-footed.
Mm-hmm.
We can feel as though we're out of step with that lifestyle of the happy hours or the client meals or the company parties or the
Mm-hmm.
travel. Like it's it's a real thing, and it's the only place that I know of where you don't have a choice necessarily whether you participate in an environment where there's going to be alcohol. Like in my personal life, if somebody's having a big, New Year's Eve party and I know there's going to be drinking, I can choose to go or not go.
Mm-hmm.
But if I'm part of a company and they're having a company party,
Mm-hmm.
like I
Mm-hmm.
have to go.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the reason why we really wanted for Sober Life Rocks to bring those people in who have that situation. And like you talked throughout this whole time about the value of community.
Oh, yes. You have to have a
Um,
community. You can't do this alone. You just cannot do this alone. There's no way. I've tried it. It doesn't work. You
Absolutely.
you have to have people around you that are in your corner,
Yeah.
right? You have to have people that love you through your flaws
Yeah.
and your mistakes.
And so that leads me to wanting to know more about the Sober Curator. So tell me about that, what it is, how did it start? Tell me all.
So, the fact that I've been in media, my entire career and definitely the back half after from the magazine forward has been very nicheified around lifestyle content.
Mhm.
I'm Gen X. I'm obsessed with pop culture. And so I became really obsessed with watching every movie, reading every book that came out that had addiction, recovery, sobriety, mental health as part of the leading storyline of the characters. And, we talked about the fact when we got sober, there wasn't a lot of options. There was a couple books, there were no podcasts, there was no social media. And now there's a million podcasts, there's a million books, there's a million social media accounts to follow. There's all different pathways to recovery. Um, it went from 0 to 1,000 like in a blink, it felt like. And around I honestly, I did not recover. I did not talk about being sober or recovery on the internet until I launched the Sober Curator in the summer of 2020. If you knew me, if you met me in real life and we spent any amount of time together, you would probably quickly know that about me. Um, but it wasn't something I was putting on the internet. But when I realized when the pandemic happened and we were all given the gift of time back, or many of us were, I had this idea for a sober or a recovery magazine targeted at people in long-term recovery because everything I was seeing come online was targeted at people in early recovery or that needed to get sober, how to get sober. Great. I would have probably used those things if they were available when I was in early recovery, but that's not where I was now. And
Right.
so nothing was speaking to me. I didn't want to open up a magazine that had a bunch of treatment center ads. And I'm not against treatment. I went to one, but it's like that's not meeting me where I'm at. And so I couldn't find it and I couldn't find it. And I started talking to a friend and I was like, this thing doesn't exist. And now there's a lot of us in long term recovery. Like, I feel like it should. And so when the pandemic happened, like many people for the first few months, I was like, oh, we're not going to be here very long. I'm just going to make some banana bread. Right. But then when I realized, oh, we're going to be here for I don't know how long, I was at the TV station, I was working remote. And because of my health issues and my son's health issues and not knowing what we know now, like we were not going anywhere. We were having grocery delivered, like we were not going anywhere. And so I was like, I came to a point where I was like, I need to be able to look back at this time and know that I spent the extra time well. Because I knew we weren't going to be in that forever. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew it wasn't going to be forever. And so that's when I was like, well, maybe I could launch this lifestyle blog. I had taught myself WordPress, I had taught myself graphic design, and while I don't consider myself a writer, I clearly don't have any problem talking. So I was like, I'll just write the way I talk. It'll be fine. But I was also knew that if I was going to have this lifestyle authority on where to find all the cool new things or the things that I think are really great, I it couldn't just be me. I have excellent taste, but um, other people have good taste too, right? So I knew I was going to need a group of people to do it that had different ways of getting sober and different lengths of sobriety in order to make it well rounded. But I was also bootstrapping the whole thing. So I didn't have a lot of money to throw at it, but I had time and I had skills and I had know how from running a magazine and working on lifestyle TV shows and being an early adopter to everything social media and email and .com the whole time. And so four of us started. We launched before we were ready. I actually launched the website by accident. The original name was the Sober Critic was the original name. And within a couple weeks, I was like, this isn't the right word. I don't want people to ever think I'm criticizing someone's path of recovery. So the name was changed to Curator, which is a much better fit, much better word. And we just started. We just started and we tried to develop all these different departments within the site in all the different lifestyle categories. And slowly, people started seeing us and people started saying, how do I join you? I want to do what you're doing. I was like, great. So we went from 4 people to now in 2024, there are 46 of us. And most of us are in the United States. There are 2 in Canada. They are, of course, very nice. And there are 2 in the UK, and they are also nice, but they have accents, so they're even more adorable. And we have, I think the youngest person in sobriety is a little over a year, and the longest length of sobriety is a woman that has 40 years. Where different age generations are represented, different backgrounds, different cultures. We have a small LGBT community within the site. We have one trans contributor. And so we have people with different spiritual paths. We have people that identify as being in recovery. We have people that identify as being alcohol free. We're trying to be really loose with the labels, like wear the labels that make you feel good, but we're all here for the same reason. And I really wanted an emphasis on the fun because I got so tired of people being like, oh, you're sober. That must be so boring. I'm like, actually, no. Like, have we met? Like, my life is amazing. It's not boring. It's fun. It's vibrant. Like, I laugh all the time. And so the emphasis has always really been on the fun and the entertainment, but sprinkling in with a little bit of awareness, a little bit of education, motivation, inspiration, and of course, community is what wraps it all together.
And I love the tagline. So the tagline I saw is getting sober matters, staying sober matters more.
It does. It does. And we really are just anchored in long-term recovery, no days off, because that's for me, in my experience, where the magic has happened. And I'm not knocking on anyone who starts and stops. Your journey is your journey. But for me, I wouldn't have been able to make all the progress I've made if I had been starting and stopping. Because for me, if I start again, I don't know if I've got another stop in me because that's how strong of a foothold the addiction has on me. And I'm not willing to risk it, but it's also one day at a time. I can't see the future. I don't know forever. But we're really trying to draw that line because there are so many people. The internet has become the wild, wild west for sobriety. And while I think that the tide rises all boats, there's a lot of misinformation out there, and there's a lot of information that might work for someone that is gray area drinker, but someone who it's life or death, if they buy in to what that person is saying, like that could be really detrimental to them. So while it's very serious to me, even though I'm trying to make it fun and playful, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And I encourage everybody to go check it out because there is something for everybody. Like you said, I was reading, there's craft ideas, And
We
I
have
gotta say,
crafts, we have horoscopes, we just launched a retreat calendar, we have a sober calendar, we have book reviews, movie reviews, podcast reviews, music reviews. We do cover drinks. We're just cover anything. We're just anything and everything.
I love it. I love it so much. And thank you for bringing that to our world because you're right. It it can feel daunting and it can feel very alone.
Hmm.
To know that there's a website where you feel like, wow, there's this whole world of sober happenings and resources and fun and ways to connect. And like, I just love that.
Yes, and what my hope is when somebody lands on the site, they see exactly that. Oh, there's a lot of people doing this and a lot of people having fun doing this. If they see that and they never even come back to the site, I feel like I feel like I've done my part, right? Because I put in that little kernel of, oh, I can do this. And I will never forget, a woman reached out to me. She wanted to become a contributor, and she wanted to write about essential oils, and she was 1 year sober. And I was like, great. We definitely don't have anyone on the site writing about essential oils. That sounds fabulous. Everyone's a volunteer. I do now have an investor and I do have some people on payroll. But most everybody that touches the project is volunteering. It's a big passion project. And she said to me, well, this is so exciting because you're part of my sobriety story. And I was like, we just met. What are you talking about?
Mm,
And apparently, she had been listening to a podcast while she was still drinking, and every episode that came out, and because she was, knowing that she wanted to stop, but not stopping. And for whatever reason, when she heard the episode that I was on, something in there, she heard, oh, I'll still have fun,
mm.
and she believed me. So, and then that started her journey. And so it's like, and that, to me, that's the paycheck. Like, that's all I want, is to know that I've helped other people. To me, I don't need anything else. So that's why we do it.
That is why we do it. And thank you. Thank you for doing that. Thank you for showing up unapologetically you, inclusive, and all the things that it makes my heart sing that we had this chance to spend time together. Is there anything else that I haven't asked that you would like to share with the listeners before we close?
Well, we do have an email newsletter called the Sober Sip. If you want to sign up for our newsletter, it drops every Monday. And it just has kind of a recap of things that have published in the last week. So if you're not someone that likes to go to sites on a regular, but you want to kind of stay in the know, it's a great newsletter to be on because you can skim it really quick and see if there's anything going on that you need to know about. So that's there. And you'll have to stay tuned because I might be putting together an event in Seattle in 2025.
Ooh, that
Yeah,
sounds exciting. Well, we will have links to those things in the show notes. And thank you, Alysse, for all that you're doing. Thank you for this time you spent today and being so vulnerable and sharing your story. Um, Hearing other people's stories does matter
it
because it
does.
helps us break isolation.
Yeah.
So thank you to those of you listening. And until next time, this is Margie Schaller with Sober Life Rocks.